This weekend we'll have the Japanese Grand Prix, and it will be the third race of the season. Now, the season has been an interesting one. At least for now, we've only had two races. The opinion is divided when it comes to the regulations. Specifically, the 2026 cars have essentially divided opinion. On one side, we have the hardcores who are not a huge fan of these cars. I personally am not a huge fan of these cars either. On the other side, we have the more casual fan base. They have been massively supportive of the kind of racing we've seen so far. With that being said, we've only had two races, so we still do not have the clear picture. We will have probably a better picture in the coming races, and let's see what happens. For now, this will be the third race of the season. After this, we'll have around 4 to 5 weeks of a break. So once that is done, the next race would be in Miami. So talking about the race in Japan, what can we expect? So this video is going to be a short one where essentially what I'll try to do is I'll try to share my top 5 bold predictions for the Japanese Grand Prix. I'll essentially try to share a bit of a preview and what you can expect from the race weekend coming forward. So without further ado, let's jump into it. And in my first prediction, I expect Alpine to struggle compared to where it was in China, and the Racing Bulls to have a slightly better weekend and surge compared to where it was in the second race of the season. So when we talk about Alpine, first of all, Alpine, it has had a much better start to the season compared to where it was in 2025. They essentially finished the season last in the championship in 2025. This time around, they are on a much better footing, and the reasoning behind it, essentially it comes down to the kind of power unit they have. And we've seen Pierre Gasly score a decent number of points. He was 6th in the race in China and is actually currently ahead of Max Verstappen in the championship. Overall, the package is fine for Alpine. There is, however, one key weakness which kind of got exposed in Australia. The car is not that good when it comes to the fast speed sections. That's where it tends to struggle a bit. That's why in Japan, I expect Alpine to struggle compared to where it was in China, where arguably it had either the 4th or 5th or 6th fastest car, depending on who the driver was. On the other side, we have Racing Bulls, and Racing Bulls had an impressive start to the season in Australia, especially with Arvid Lindblad. However, they did not have that much of a smoother weekend in China. In terms of overall pace, they were behind the likes of Alpine and Haas. This time around, however, expect them to make a jump. And the reasoning behind it is Suzuka is an energy-starved track. And what it means is it's going to take a lot of effort to ultimately harvest electric energy. Now, the Red Bull power unit, it has its issues, and essentially they come from the reliability side of things. However, there is one key strength where it tends to jump ahead compared to others, and that strength is in harvesting electric power. That was the reason why we had the Racing Bulls surge a bit to a certain extent in Australia, and that is also going to be the reason behind the team's surge on a track like Suzuka. So expect Racing Bulls to make a jump again in the midfield, and we might see them battling for points once again. At number 4, I think the racing for the Japanese Grand Prix, it's not going to be as intense or interesting as what we saw in China. Now, China was a fun race, at least when it comes to the entertainment factor. For the hardcores, it was a bit of a pain, but still everyone will get on board in due time. With that being said, one of the reasons behind China being that fun and entertaining was because the track in itself is conducive to overtakes. There are a lot of areas where you can have two cars battling it out wheel to wheel in different sections. You don't really have that in Suzuka, and in Suzuka there are a lot of sections where it is essentially single file. Except maybe if an overtake is made on the start-finish straight, every other part, the S's and the rest, they are going to be single file. And if you're going to see overtakes in that particular section, it's going to leave drivers susceptible to what's going to come next, which is the Degner 1 and Degner 2 and so on. So when we talk about Suzuka, of course, it's not going to be as entertaining as China, at least in my view, from the early reading that I can see. However, there are still going to be areas where overtakes could be made. You could see the overtakes at the spoon section. You could see overtakes at the hairpin. And of course, there's a start, finish straight and the chicane just before the end of the lap. So there are 3 to 4 sections where overtakes could be made. So yes, it's not going to be a processional race, but the scope of action or wheel-to-wheel action, as we say, it's going to be lesser than what we had in China. Next up in number 3, I think Red Bull is going to be the third fastest car. Now, Red Bull, after the race in China, it went into crisis mode. Lauren Mekies did not talk to the media, which was a bit of a surprise. But what was essentially exposed during the Chinese GP weekend was, first of all, the track kind of showcased the areas where the Red Bull powertrain was not good enough. It also showcased where the chassis was not working as well as it should. So overall, the scenario kind of exacerbated the plight of Max Verstappen and Isa Kadjar. However, when we are moving to a track like Suzuka, the track is energy starved, and that tends to play in the hands of the Red Bull powertrain. So just like in Australia, where in my view, the Red Bull powertrain and the Red Bull racing team was the third fastest car, this weekend we are once again going to see them jump one step forward and be the third fastest team. We might potentially see Max Verstappen fight for the podium, at least for a certain duration, before the tire degradation sets in. So yes, that's the early indication. Plus, Red Bull is also bringing a few upgrades. We'll see what happens overall. Next up, I think Charles Leclerc is going to secure a podium. Now, this one is maybe an expected one, to be fair, but I think there is a scenario where we might see Charles Leclerc secure a podium in the Japanese Grand Prix. And the reason behind it is, I think, once again, Ferrari and Mercedes, these are going to be the top two teams. But I also expect Mercedes to still have the edge over Ferrari overall. Of course, the sector first and maybe to a certain extent the sector two, they are going to play towards the strengths of Ferrari, but the deficit in the power unit is a bit too much. You cannot make up all of it just with aerodynamic efficiency. It's just not possible. So once again, that is the area where Ferrari is struggling, and the power unit efficiency is also playing a role. So all in all, I do expect Ferrari to struggle compared to Mercedes. And if that is the case, I think we might once again see the two Mercedes drivers just run away with the race. And then we'll have Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc fighting for scrapes, essentially P3, a podium position. Now, while that is the case, and again, there is a lot of momentum on Lewis Hamilton's side. He just secured his first ever podium with Ferrari in China. I still think overall Leclerc is the better package. And unlike China and Australia, those are the two tracks where Leclerc has admitted they are a bit of a bogey track for him. I think Leclerc will prevail against Lewis this time around, and we will see him picking up his second podium of the season. And finally, the last prediction, I think Kimi Antonelli wins the race. Now, this is a bold one, and I think most probably I won't be surprised if it ends up being incorrect, but hear me out, hear out the logic that I'm trying to put together. So in my view, what's going to happen is we are looking at Kimi Antonelli, a driver who is coming off his very first race win of his career. And for any driver, first race win, it's a massive confidence boost, and it also adds momentum. On this track, once again, Kimi Antonelli, he will have the momentum on his side. And this time around, I think he will end up outpacing George Russell. Now, one thing a lot of people might not have noticed, in the first couple of races, the gap between Kimi Antonelli and George Russell, essentially when it comes to the long runs or qualifying, it's roughly around 2 to 3 tenths. That's not a big gap, and that is the kind of gap that can be filled with more experience, more learning, more iterations, which is exactly what a Kimi Antonelli, a 19-year-old kid, would be able to do compared to a veteran like George Russell. So yes, again, it's a bit of a shot in the dark. I might be wrong, but I'm going with Kimi Antonelli winning the 2026 Japanese Grand Prix. What are your predictions? Drop them in the comments and let me know. I hope you guys liked the video. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. Drop a comment. Hit the like button. I'll see you next time.